let's get into this. Matt Gaetz. He is the Republican congressman from Florida who apparently is willing to say anything. And this guy's definitely gotten TV ready. He's dropped a couple of pounds. I don't know if you noticed that, right? Like it's interesting. This happened during like the OJ thing too. There was like a couple of people who basically built their whole careers on the OJ thing. And
Greta Van Susteren?
Yeah, a myriad of people actually. And you see this, and then like you can track them. You go back and you look at like the first times they're on television, and they're a little scruffy and this and that, and then like within like a month or two, they're completely put together. And so Matt Gaetz definitely realizes like, oh, I have found my ticket, and that ticket is to come on and say anything. And you could tell that it's affecting him because he's shedding the pounds, and he's thinking like this is going to send me to the top. But here he is with Jake Tapper. And I will say this about Marcy Wheeler, who we just had on. Every decent news person who wants to have an understanding of this stuff reads what she writes. I can tell you that right now. The top national security reporters in the country, you can see they will engage with her on Twitter. I imagine they do it off Twitter as well, because she's just that knowledgeable. She wrote the definitive book on the Scooter Libby trials, who obviously came up recently, was pardoned by Donald Trump as a sort of a way of saying like, let me test these muscles out. But
lay the groundwork.
You got to lay in the groundwork.
Right,
but here's Matt Gaetz getting called out by Jake Tapper on that false conspiracy that Marcy Wheeler walked us through involving the FBI informant.
I wondered if you were going to bring up this issue about what was presented before the FISA court, because I don't know how you know that. You're not on the House Intelligence Committee. You haven't seen the underlying intelligence. How do you know that anything improper was done before the FISA court?
Well, we have received briefings from the FBI regarding the elements of their application. We've also read the memo from the House Intelligence Committee that the entire House voted to declassify and the American people have been able to observe. And that memo laid out pretty clearly that the principal piece of evidence, the first piece of evidence laid out, was this dossier that was paid for by the DNC.
No. That memo made it very clear that it was Papadopoulos' meeting with the Australian diplomat in which he acknowledged that he had talked to somebody with Kremlin connections about dirt on Hillary Clinton emails.
That was one element, Jake, but they said that the first piece of evidence.
The Nunes memo said specifically that was the reason that the investigation was launched.
No, that was a memo from Peter Strzok that did initially launch the investigation, but that didn't lead to the application before the FISA court. My allegation is that the Woods procedures were not followed before the FISA court. There would not have been any presentation to the FISA court in the absence of that very dossier. That's not, Joe, don't take my word for it. That was the testimony of Andrew McCabe.
Well, I mean, I have talked to people at the Justice Department who say you keep saying this and you don't know what you're talking about because you're not on the House Committee on Intelligence. You haven't seen the underlying intelligence.
I happen to have Marshall McLuhan right here. This is what they are trying. And Gaetz is sort of like a lagging indicator because the Steele memo is like sort of the first attempt to discredit what's going on, and it is quite clear that the investigation was launched because of Papadopoulos going around talking about it and predicting, just coincidentally, that the Russians would have that these emails would come out. And as Marcy Wheeler laid out for us, the Australian ambassador, or I should say diplomat, didn't think of anything at the time, but when they ultimately came out and Papadopoulos was right, they let the FBI know. And that's what launched the investigation. There may have been elements of the Steele memo dossier that was included in the FISA application, but that was because stuff had been borne out by other sources. So understand that what's going on here is the right knows, broadly speaking, that there are basically, if not two, then multiple narratives that coexist in our country at the same time as to what reality is when it comes to the news. And they understand that they can go out and present a second narrative or an alternate narrative, and that their audience will be exposed only to will either be exposed exclusively to their narrative, or will become so inundated with competing narratives that they'll just throw up their hands and say everybody's lying. And this came out in an interview with Judy Woodruff and Lesley Stahl. And I think this is relevant really only in this respect. Yes, Donald Trump is an idiot, but he does on some level know what he's doing when it comes to that concept of multiple narratives. Here is Lesley Stahl. She's talking with Judy Woodruff. This apparently some, the Deadline Club Awards dinner. I have no idea what that is. And she's talking about the president's relationship with the press. Listen to what Lesley Stahl had to say.
And at one point, he started to attack the press. And it's just me and my boss and him. He has a huge office.
Pause it for 1 second. Okay, so she is related that she is in there for an interview with him. They sit down, and as he starts to before the interview starts to go, he starts attacking the press.
My boss and him. He has a huge office. And he's attacking the press. And there were no cameras. There was nothing going on. And I said, that is getting tired. Why are you doing this? You're doing it over and over, and it's boring, and it's
now
time
pause
to
it.
end.
I want to almost just this is just sort of a side note, and I want you to go back so we can hear the full thing what she's saying. But I also think it's creepy that reporters and press people would be in there sort of giving advice. It's boring. What? Really? I mean, I just think that's weird, but that's not really the point of this clip.
At one point, he started to attack the press. And it's just me and my boss and him. He has a huge office. And he's attacking the press. And there were no cameras. There was nothing going on. And I said, that is getting tired. Why are you doing this? You're doing it over and over, and it's boring, and it's time to end that. You've won the nomination. And why do you keep hammering at this? And he said, you know why I do it? I do it to discredit you all and demean you all, so when you write negative stories about me, no one will believe you.
Yeah, mission accomplished. I mean, I would say not no one, but when he's talking about no one, he's talking about his people. And I think, broadly speaking, this is what's going on in our politics sort of writ large. Why does a guy like Matt Gaetz get up there and even though he knows what he's saying is completely a lie, and even when the host of the show says, hey, man, I've talked to everybody that would know about this, and you're lying. And he doesn't care because mission accomplished. I don't need to convince somebody of something. I just have to make sure that they're not convinced by anybody else. And that's what's going on here. And that's why it is, I think there's such like a broad malaise, and there's a lot of people who are walking around who just say, to heck with all of it. I don't know what to believe. And, most people don't have the time to sort of dedicate to digging into this stuff. And so it makes sense in that regard.
Poison the wells.
Poison the wells. I
just took you to Schlu.
Get Scott Pruitt in there, poison some wells.
What we need to do to the press what Scott Pruitt is doing to the waterways.